Why would anyone in this day and age run for political office, especially if you have to take a $70,000 per year pay cut? Arizona State Representative Analise Ortiz has done that. She joins us now. Cal, the guitar hero, take us in. My name is Rob Hunter. This is Equal Matters. Conversations are where we are equal. It matters when we listen. Today, we're going to have a great conversation with Representative Analise Ortiz. She is a first-term Arizona State Representative who represents parts of Phoenix and Glendale, Arizona. Representative Ortiz is a progressive Democrat who represents a vibrant community filled with rich culture and history, a community that isn't often talked about on the news. And because of that, these neighborhoods are often misunderstood. The district Representative Ortiz represents is entrepreneurial, with plenty of small businesses. It's also one of the lowest income per capita districts in the state. Affordable housing and lack of access to health care are amongst constituent concerns. Today, we'll talk to Representative Ortiz about those. You'll also get to hear her journey from journalism to advocacy to politics. I've worked in media for almost 25 years. One area we, collectively, haven't done a good job is covering people who are often referred to as marginalized, inner city, or urban. Because when people are forgotten, so are the issues they care about. Issues like affordable housing and access to health care, issues we'll discuss today. Representative Analise Ortiz is passionate about these issues, as am I. No matter our political beliefs, many would agree helping people be able to live their version of the American dream, no matter who they vote for, is what we're striving for. These aren't just issues here in Arizona. They're the same issues many cities and towns face, so they're issues worth discussing. Equal Matters is a place for us to learn and understand. Arizona State Representative Analise Ortiz just wrapped up her first legislative session as a lawmaker. So, Representative Analise Ortiz, why did you run for political office? And I only ask you that because politics seems incredibly divisive, incredibly difficult work. And in our state, Arizona, it's kind of a low-paying part-time yet full-time position. So the question again is why?
Well, I was born and raised here in Arizona, and throughout my life have had a calling in my heart to fight against injustice. And I think it really came to a head, and what made me make the final decision was the pandemic. And we saw the cost of housing skyrocketing. We saw people losing their jobs, losing their health care, and it felt as though there was no adequate solutions that were being proposed for people who were really suffering. And during this time, I also had been working on a lot of criminal justice reform legislation at the Capitol as part of my work at the ACLU of Arizona. And there were some lawmakers who were going to be vacating their seats who had been our champions for criminal justice. And I thought, this is the time to not only fight for the issues that I care about, like housing and worker protections, but also to carry the torch forward on criminal justice reform. So I threw in my hat, and here we are.
How did that process work? So your background is you graduated from ASU, you got a journalism degree, you went out into the field, realized journalism is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just having gone through it, it's a challenging profession.
Oh, yeah.
But that calling was there somewhere that led you to the ACLU. What was that like, that transition? Because you did it young. You did it early on in your career. You tried something you knew that wasn't for you. So how did you make that transition?
Yeah, I'll tell you, there were many moments throughout my journalism career that I was meeting and interviewing incredible people, organizers along the Texas-Mexico border who were fighting against the over-surveillance of their communities, parents who had lost their children in the mass shooting in Las Vegas. And I realized through many of these moments that the real change was happening on the other side of the camera. And that if I really wanted to change material conditions for people, I couldn't just report about it. I had to get in the fight. I decided to apply at the ACLU of Arizona. I had done stories with the ACLU and appreciated their perspective on many things. I never expected to get the job. The minute I did, I was so nervous to end my TV career. But I was ready, and I knew in my heart it was the right thing to do. so many of my skills as a journalist really helped me in that role as a communication strategist, training people on how to talk to the media, and also training or crafting talking points and messages on issues like criminal justice reform, which can be very challenging issues to talk about, and helping people speak to it in a way that gets us all on the same page and helps us find common ground. And that has also come in handy in my political career.
So the ACLU is the American for Civil Liberties Union. This used to be something that, because the ACLU is so fascinating because it was started, and you may know more, so correct me, please, Representative, if I get something wrong. It was founded by Jewish lawyers many years ago, and one of the first things that they took on was actually defending Nazis to be able to have a parade because they were so fully believing in free speech. So the reason I bring that up is I think there are so many commonalities that we have, no matter which political aisle you come from, about our civil liberties, because I'm super passionate about them as well, and know that the ACLU is one of those organizations that sometimes is considered liberal, sometimes is considered conservative. So what did you learn at the ACLU about some of the issues you're most passionate about, like criminal justice, affordable housing, lack of affordable health care? How did that inspire you to say, I'm gonna run for office?
Right. Well, the ACLU has been around for more than 100 years. And you're right. There are a lot of moments within the organization's history that the staff, including myself, were not proud of, including the Skokie case that you just talked about. There were, the purpose of the ACLU was it was founded to protect the Constitution. And that means putting aside the political differences or political things that will come into play and simply looking at what does the Constitution say. And so where does that tie into my political analysis? Well, that means, protecting people's right to not be searched unlawfully by law enforcement. It means protecting people's right to be in a same-sex marriage, which ACLU has been on the forefront of protecting same-sex couples. And so what did I learn? Well, one of the things that I learned at ACLU was how to work with stakeholders across the political aisle. ACLU is a nonpartisan organization, and we had to often work with other groups like Americans for Prosperity, which was founded by the Koch brothers, a group that as a Democrat, I would probably never see myself associating with. But there were criminal justice reform issues that we were on the same page about. And when we were operating in a Republican trifecta at the state legislature.
Which means governor, state house, state senate, right?
That's right. Having a conservative group like Americans for Prosperity come out in support of sentencing reform was huge. And it helped move along Republican lawmakers and ultimately get us to the goal of reducing the amount of people who are in our state prisons.
So you represent a neighborhood called Maryvale, which for those of us that live in Arizona or in the Valley, it's kind of looked at as a lower economic zone. And if I've heard a lot of people say this, don't go to Maryvale. I don't share that opinion, but it's the outside impression of a section of Phoenix that you don't necessarily want to hang out in. So as you transition from ACLU to representing Maryvale, what is the neighborhood like, your district? What are the people like? Who lives there? And how do these issues that you're passionate about, criminal justice reform, affordable housing, I know this is a loaded question, how does it all tie together for you? Because one of the things I love about you is you're always out knocking on doors, checking in on your constituents. I find that to be very rare. So I know that you have a connection to this community and you care about it. So how did you arrive at, okay, this is what I need to do. These are the people I need to represent, and in a sense, fight for in the state legislature?
The stereotypes and stigma about our community are hurtful. Maryvale is one of the most beautiful, vibrant, diverse communities in the state of Arizona. It is full of young families. We have one of the youngest districts in the state. It is full of hardworking people, of a beautiful culture, the Latino culture. We are more than 50% Latino in my district. And, neighbors that look out for each other. When I'm knocking on doors in Maryvale, I knocked on more than 10,000 doors by myself to win my election.
Wow.
I had a wonderful team that was also knocking, so we hit more than that. But when going out to knock doors, it was so often that people would invite me for a carne asada, that they would offer me water, they would offer me beer. They are just a very welcoming people. That's right. And the other thing that I would notice, because my district is very segregated, I also represent parts of Glendale. And what was interesting was in the community of Maryvale and South Glendale, the more southern part of Glendale, when knocking doors, neighbors would notice that there was someone that wasn't, living on their street who was knocking on their door, and they would come out and they would talk to me, and they were always looking out for their neighbor. Or I would knock on the door and I'd hear across the street, they're not home, they're on vacation. So everybody really knew their neighbors. And that is one of the most magical things about Maryvale, is that it still has this very strong, tight-knit community feel that I feel is missing in many places. And one of the issues that is impacting our community the most is the high rate of rent and of smaller homes being purchased by big investors. We have one of the largest eviction rates in my district, and it is hurting that sense of community and that sense of safety that we have established. So it was really important to me that housing and homelessness would be the number one issue I would champion. The other issue is the over-policing of our communities. We have many people who are raising their grandchildren because the parent might be incarcerated, people who can't vote because they have a criminal record, people who can't find housing because they have a criminal record. So these issues impact my district disproportionately, and my constituents are asking me to fight for them, and I am dedicated to fight for these issues.
What did you learn when you knocked on 10,000 doors?
I learned that people want to share. They want to talk about what is impacting them the most. They are brilliant, and they have their own policy ideas that many of my colleagues at the legislature would be quite wise to take on. And I learned that people are hungry for change.
Yes.
I so often heard people say, well, I don't trust Democrats or Republicans. Neither of you are getting things right. Neither of you are making progress. And when I would hear that, I would say, I agree, and that's why I'm running. I have never run before. And I would see them kind of relax a little bit, because now it's not a politician on their doorstep. It was a person from their community. And they would start to ask, well, how do you think you're going to change things? And my number one thing would be, I'm not going to stop talking to you. I'm not going to stop listening to what you need and staying true to what I said I would fight for. And that message really resonated with folks.
So when you started knocking on doors, actually, I want to back up. What was it like the first door you knocked on, knowing that you're officially running for office? Like, you're now in, you got to walk the district. So what was that first, like, I don't even know if you can remember. It's 10,000. It was probably 20,000 ago at this point.
Right. I definitely remember. I'm going to tell you a story about one of the first doors I knocked. I don't know if it was the first door, but it was in my neighborhood. So I know it was the very first day I went out to knock doors. It was strange, right? I was very used to knocking doors for other candidates. Now I'm talking about myself. I have to pitch myself. And that is a very unique situation to be in. I knocked on a door, and this young woman about my age answered, and she said, "You're running as a Democrat?" She said, "What do you think about Kyrsten Sinema?" And I said, "I don't think she's doing a good job for our communities." And this woman lit up, and she said, "I agree. Can you believe she did X, Y, or Z?" And I said, yes, it's politicians like Senator Sinema who are working, in my view, for corporate interests and not for people. That is encouraging me to run. That woman, she signed my petition to help me get my name on the ballot. And she became not only one of my strongest volunteers on my campaign, but one of my really good friends.
That's awesome.
Yes. And so it's really important that my goal was not just to get myself on the ballot and get elected. My goal was to find people in my community who had never been engaged before, who had never knocked on doors, who had never done more than just simply vote, and get them to see this as a movement and to stay with me, not only to see through my election, but now to help make policy change. And Kristen, that woman, she definitely is somebody who's been by my side through all that.
That's fascinating. Because I always love the power of conversation, which is kind of the essence behind this podcast. Is I've always found that the more people I talk to, regardless of what I think the government should or shouldn't do, it broadens my perspective. And that, I think, it's beneficial to me as a human, because just because I like a certain thing doesn't mean it's the right thing or the only thing. So we should have discussions about what to do about affordable housing from a government standpoint, policy-wise, which I can't wait to do with you, too. I would love to do an in-depth about how that impacts people, and we'll do that in the future. But I know that's a major issue. So there's a role that the government can play and money can play, but maybe there's also some roles where the private sector or something can actually help. And it's worthy to have those discussions, because I think at the root of it all, most of us, maybe I'm putting too much, but we do care about people at the end of the day. In this great country of ours, we should always focus on less people suffering, because we have the capabilities, the knowledge, the money to do that. So at the root level where we're at, you're knocking on doors. When you started to get those signatures and people are like, okay, I kind of dig this. How did that shape where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do in the legislature? You know, as you're getting these signatures, thinking at that time you might win, which you ended up obviously winning.
You know, I was not surprised by how many people told me they couldn't afford their rent, or that they had adult children moving back in with them because they couldn't afford their rent. I met seniors who said that they were on fixed incomes, and if the landlord raised their rent one more time, they would be on the street. I cared about housing before, but I will never forget those people. I can't forget them. They are still people calling my office telling me that they're facing eviction. And that is why housing has become my number one issue. I care about many other things. I am the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, where we focus on criminal justice issues. But my heart is focused on this housing issue. I have been willing to put my political capital on the line by supporting ideas that not every politician sees as popular, because my community is demanding it. And I just can't express how crucial it is that we find solutions. This is never about political games to me. It's about people's lives. And that's how I govern. And it's because of the people I met at the doors who are not just a vote to me. They are my community.
I don't think I've ever heard a politician say that, quite honestly. and that's another part of why I wanted to have this conversation with you, Representative, is, and again, Representative Analise Ortiz, state lawmaker in Arizona, is because I've been doing this for 25 years. I've been talking to politicians for 25 years. And it always felt the higher you go up, whether it's state, whether you're representative, you're a state senator, you're now a congressman, you're a mayor, whatever, the higher you go up, the further it seems that the politicians are away from us, we the people. And I think that is so missing. So how do you stay going forward that you're going to stay this grounded in your community? Because I'm sure many politicians start out exactly where you're at, super passionate, knocking on doors. But somewhere along the line, they kind of lose that. So how do you plan to stay involved? We'll get back to Representative Analise Ortiz in just a moment. Did you know a coach is going to speed up your progress wherever you're at in life? Because a coach is going to help you learn new skills faster, skills that you can apply and turn into wins. So if you're looking to grow, let me know. I'm Rob Hunter. I'll show you all my broadcasting techniques I've developed over 25 years that will help you perform better. Performing better helps you stand out, whether it's at work or in your personal relationships. Broadcasting skills come in handy because performance is about how you use your voice. I want to help you fine-tune your main instrument of communication, your voice. So if you're looking to get a raise or you're looking to move up in your company or maybe go out on your own or maybe you are an entrepreneur, schedule a free 20-minute phone call at paintedporchstrategies.com/Rob or check the show notes for this episode. It'll link directly to my calendar. Because one lesson I've learned in life is that it's up to me. Invest in yourself to speed up your progress, to challenge yourself, and hold yourself accountable. Your voice is your ultimate advantage if you use it correctly. Using your voice correctly unlocks your full potential. So let's get started with that free 20-minute call at paintedporchstrategies.com/Rob or check the show notes for this episode. Let's get you back now to Representative Analise Ortiz from Arizona. So how do you plan to stay involved?
It's a great question. I had a lot of voters ask me that. They said, here you are now. We know you guys only come around at election time. What are you going to do once the corporate lobbyists start offering you a steak dinner? I had one voter tell me that if I came back in a few months and was taking those steak dinners from corporate lobbyists, he was going to catch me down at the local bar and we'd get in a tussle. So I think the biggest thing is making myself available and accessible to my constituents. I don't think I'm going to lose that. I absolutely love talking to my constituents on the day-to-day. Many of them have my personal cell phone number. I send letters throughout the legislative session to make sure that they are up to date on what I'm working on. And I think one of the other big things is the community organizers that I knew and worked with before I was ever elected, whose job is it has been to hold politicians accountable. They're not going to let me forget the promises that I made and who I'm accountable to. And I hope that they will continue to show up. And if I make a mistake, tell me that I've made a mistake. Never anybody to shy away from those kind of accountability conversations. So that's going to keep me real rooted in my community and in what I'm fighting for.
I love it. You have a plan. That's exactly it. And that's what I've noted in my own personal development. Like my wife holds me accountable. I have a coach to hold me accountable. I got certain friends to hold me accountable so that I'm staying on mission, right? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of it, I feel like I have a calling as well, and I'm following that calling, but it's sometimes easy to get lost in it or sometimes doubt shows up. Mm-hmm. Speaking of, while you're running for office, did your doubt show up? Because we all have that fear brain that's like, what are you doing?
Oh, my gosh, yes.
How did you manage it?
Thankfully, I have an incredible partner who helped me, at the end of those long, long days of knocking on doors, kind of just freaking out and thinking, did I do something wrong today? Did I plan this right? And him being able to really talk me through those moments. So family and friends was huge. The other thing I would say is I knocked on many doors where people would cut me off before I could finish my pitch and say, you're so young. I thought you were a high schooler. What do you mean you're running for office? How old are you? And those things got to me at first. I started to think maybe I need to change my hair. Maybe I need to dress different, look older. And I started to realize that it was because I was young. That was what was motivating me to run. And when I started telling people that, I'm running because I'm young and I can't afford to own a home. I'm running because I'm young and I grew up with mass shooting drills in my schools and seeing no political change. I'm running because I'm young and I have to think about the climate crisis and how that might impact my plans for a future family. And people started to say, wow, yeah, we need young people like you. I knocked on many doors where there were a lot of older folks. One of them started crying when she saw me on her doorstep because she said, I'm just so glad that the younger generation isn't giving up, isn't becoming cynical, and that you're actually putting yourself out there and running.
Yeah.
So those conversations really helped me through the moments of doubt and helped me to keep going.
That's fantastic because there's so many lessons for all of us in dealing with our fear brain, and you just got to deal with it. In short, you got to find tools, techniques, family, friends, partners to help you through that because staying true could be challenging. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you about school shooting drills because I graduated high school in 96, 3 years before Columbine. So I never had a cop in my school except for random drug checks once a year or something like that. I didn't have metal detectors. I didn't have to go through that idea that, okay, if someone comes into the school with a firearm, this is what you need to do. So you're, 12 years old, going through these drills. How does that leave a lasting impact on you?
I think every child, teenager, middle schooler deserves to feel safe in their school and deserves to feel free in their school. It leaves a lasting impact when you're seeing things on the media about mass shootings. It kind of instills this fear in you at a young age of being skeptical of everything around you and of thinking about death.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was challenging. And when I became a reporter and was covering shootings and then covered one of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history, it all harkened back to, has there ever been a time in this country that we have really been safe from gun violence? And I think about my nieces and the fear that they have and the impact this is having on our future generation and that anxiety that alters your brain forever. There has to be a change. We can't accept this anymore. And we can debate all day what is the best policy decision to get a hold of America's gun violence problem, but doing nothing is not an option.
And it doesn't, again, put the politics aside for a second. I would imagine, too, you're 12 years old, you're doing a mass shooting drill. You're 13, you're doing it again. You're 14, you're doing it again. So that fear is constantly reinforced. But then it doesn't seem, as a 14-year-old, anyone's stepping up to do anything. Because there is a ton of debate all the time. Every time there's a shooting, we get the same conversation we've had since basically 99. So if you're a kid, and now as you're an adult and a lawmaker, how did you feel in being in that space and going through these drills, but knowing really none of the adult politicians were going to step up and actually do something meaningful?
Oh, you feel helpless. And I think you see that now with the student-led movements around gun violence, thinking back to Parkland, but even the young people in Tennessee who recently rose up and went to the state capitol and protested. You feel helpless, and then you look around and say, well, what can I do? I'm just one person, but what can we do together? And our country has a rich history of movements coming together to fight for social change, of protests, of freedom of assembly. That's one of the things that makes our country so beautiful. So I hope and I know that the younger generation is going to change things for the better. They are not going to accept these conditions. And that's what inspires me to keep going and to be a role model for those kids and to soon see them in these seats.
So you knock on 10,000 doors. You have all these passions. You win your election. What was it like to win, by the way? I've never run for office. I've never put myself out there like that. So to go through all of that, right? You say, I'm going to run for office. You knock on the doors. And then election night comes and you win. What goes through your mind then?
It was surreal. It was hard to believe. It was exciting. I think I was most excited for my team who had knocked on many of those doors too and were so happy and their hard work had paid off. To celebrate surrounded by my family and friends, it was beautiful. But the responsibility really weighed on my shoulders and continues to weigh on my shoulders. And
Let's talk about that because it is a stress. I get my tension in my back, so I always know that when I'm stressed, I'm like, oh, the back's tight a little bit. I don't carry that same burden of representing thousands of people, though. So you win, you go get sworn in January. You put your hand, is it on the Bible? I'm not exactly sure how the state does it. I don't know. That doesn't matter necessarily, but you swear in your oath, and now you're a lawmaker. So now you take that, 2 months in between winning, becoming a lawmaker. You're taking that responsibility with you. What was it like? This is the point of the question, not the Bible. What was it like when you took that oath and you said, okay, this is now official. I'm an official state representative in Arizona, in Maryvale and Glendale?
I thought of all the people who helped me get to where I am, and I feel that responsibility to them. And so with every vote I take, I think about my community. What are they going to think of this vote? Did any of my constituents ask me to fight for this cause? Did they ask me to fight against this cause? And how am I going to weigh that? That is how I make my decisions, and with constant communication with my community as well. And it is a huge responsibility, especially because there are many ideas that I have that realistically in a Republican-controlled legislature will not be successful in the near future, like rent control, for example, which is one of the number one policies that my community is asking for. I have found that as long as I fight like hell and am honest with my community about what I am fighting for, about the reality of it becoming law, and following up with them, then they'll have my back. And I have their back, and they know it.
Which is, again, amazing. And this is why I love your mindset, and I love your approach, and I love your passion. Because I think that there is almost universal agreement that just government right now doesn't seem to be working. Whether you're on the right wing, left wing, whether you're an independent, which more and more people are becoming, I think we sense that. So at this point in my life, I'm less concerned about my political label more so than results. Because I think that results are what matters. So now you're a lawmaker. You've talked to your community. You're constantly talking to your community. What was the first thing that you tackled as a lawmaker, and what was that like? Because now you've talked about it. You've been a journalist. You've covered politics. You work for the ACLU, so you got a little bit of insight into how lawmaking works. But now you're on the inside making laws. So how do you do that as a freshman lawmaker, brand new? Do they usher you somewhere? Do you say, I care about these issues, I want to work on these issues?
One of the interesting things is that this legislative session, there were many freshmen. I believe it was more than 50% of the lawmakers were brand new. Redistricting was part of the reason why. And so we had freshman orientation. It was almost like school. And along the way, we had many of the senior lawmakers showing us the ropes. So that was very nice to kind of be in the same boat as everybody else. We get our committee assignments. I sit on Judiciary and Commerce. Many of the housing bills go through Commerce. Oh. And then you do kind of have free reign to introduce the bills that you want and to navigate them in the way that you see best as a policymaker. For me, it was important to have community buy-in from community organizations that have done work at the legislature for a long time, like Lucha, Living United for Change in Arizona, Chispa, Arizona. They work on climate change issues. And one of the exciting things was being able to bring those folks to the Capitol and to say, here's what we're working on. What do you think about it? Where can we make amendments? And working with my community to kind of craft these pieces of legislation.
What was your first piece of legislation that you authored?
The very first bill that I authored and put in the hopper, as it's called, was a rent control bill. So the state of Arizona currently bans cities from putting a cap on how much rent can be increased.
Oh, okay.
So the bill that I introduced would overturn that law.
I have a friend of mine who was living in Chandler, and they raised his rent $500 a month. Same apartment complex, same apartment. So he has a year lease, and, a couple months before that, he had to move because he couldn't afford it. But that, I know a private business is a private business, but it did seem like it impacted a lot of people. Another guy we work with here at iHeartMedia in Phoenix, his was up $400 a month. This isn't like my normal rent increases went from like, when I first moved to Ahwatukee, it was like $808 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. Then it actually went down to like $788. And then it went back up. But it was normal, in the normal range. Like, if they said, okay, you're paying $800 a month, now it's $1,200 a month, I couldn't have done that either. So then you have to figure out what to do, and you have to move, and there's the inconvenience of that just because more people are moving in. So where did the rent control bill go? I imagine the Republicans were like, get out of here.
Yes.
But you weren't talking about saying, okay, maximum $500 a month. You're saying, no. We wanted to limit the increases that a city could put in place on their own, right?
So I actually introduced 2 rent control bills. One would have overturned the ban on rent control. So that would have meant if you're a city who wants to look at a rent control policy, you can go ahead and do it. If you're a city that never wants to have rent control, you can have those discussions about not having it in your city. But it would give cities the freedom. I introduced another bill that would implement a statewide rent cap, which would be that landlords could not raise rent any more than 5% plus the cost of inflation for that year from any given year. Both bills went nowhere. Because Republicans are in charge of the House and Senate, they are in the majority, they decide what bills receive hearings. The Republican chairman of the Commerce Committee decided not to put either of these bills up for a hearing. That is part of the advantage of being in the majority party. I do believe if we keep hammering on the rent control issue, we can bring Republicans along. And I do believe that once Democrats are in control, we can have the discussion about rent control. And I know there will probably be economists listening who might have questions about these rent control policies. And I think the important thing is that we need to have a discussion about how does the housing supply, the housing stock, the zoning laws, and rent control, how can we get all of these things to work together in a way that strengthens our economy as opposed to stifling the economy?
So you dug in to this issue because it's important in your district that rents went up a lot. People's paychecks couldn't keep up with that. So you see increased homelessness, or you see now multifamilies living together. So it's a super important issue to some parts of the state. So did you have discussions with Republicans personally? Did the Democrats? Where does that tie in together to try to get some momentum for your rent control bills? Listening is one of the most underrated communication skills. Listening provides you with information you can use to your advantage. You ask the right people, you get the right information, you get to make better decisions. But listening is just one of the many communication skills you'll hone in my communications and performance program called Master Your Message. Hi, I'm Rob Hunter. For the past 25 years, I've solely relied on my voice to share ideas, get buy-in, and influence. All of these skills, and then some, come in 8 hours worth of content spread over 8 modules where you'll sharpen your listening skills to use to your advantage. You'll also learn techniques to nail presentations, handle disputes, and how to use different communication styles with different people. What you say is your billboard. Broadcast wisely with Master Your Message. And it's not just me. Billionaire Richard Branson and the greatest investor of all time, Warren Buffett, preach that communication is the most important skill in business. So Master Your Message, the program, is designed to help you open the doors that you want to get a seat at the table you want. So take action now. Go to paintedporchstrategies.com/communication. paintedporchstrategies.com/communication, or check the show notes for a link to Master Your Message. Now, back to Representative Analise Ortiz. Where does that tie in together to try to get some momentum for your rent control bills?
Right. I never shy away from approaching my Republican colleagues about policy issues. I really want to hear them out and see if we can find common ground. Many of them have issues with rent control because of regulating private business, private landlords. They also point to, other states where the policy has been implemented, and many Republicans say it didn't work there, so it can't work here. But in my view, we don't know that until we actually look at the data and bring stakeholders in and find a policy that works for Arizona. Where I have been able to find common ground with Republicans on housing are the issues of zoning. Cities currently have very onerous zoning restrictions that make it very difficult to build housing of all income levels. And we have a few proposals this year that I feel confident will pass that aim to make it easier to build so we can increase our housing stock, because we do have a housing shortage, which is contributing to the high costs. And I hope that eventually more of my Republican colleagues will come on board with some of the tenant protection ideas. And I do see it as a multi-year conversation.
Which is smart, right? Because sometimes change takes a long time and it's difficult. And sometimes finding the common ground can be difficult. So you plan on continuing to work? Because part of the Arizona weird part of our legislature is the part-time, right? You guys are only kind of in until you pass the budget and then maybe a few more things. But usually around June-ish, you guys are done. So that limits the ability to constantly politic and say, what about this? What about this? What about this? So how do you meet that challenge, knowing that, okay, we got another session. We're going to have another session after that, another session after that. Do you have like a 5-year vision in mind for where your affordable housing programs, bills, et cetera, can go?
Yes, it's a great question. And a lot of question marks are in that plan, right? Like, who is going to be elected to the legislature in 2024?
Right.
Will Democrats have a majority? Who's going to be elected governor in 2026? Will we see Governor Hobbs have a second term? All of these things play into what is possible within the next 5-10 years. One thing that I know is last year there was a bipartisan housing supply study committee. It included lawmakers from both parties. It included stakeholders from across the housing industry. And the result of that committee was these 3 bills that are now before the legislature that are very likely to pass and bring good change for folks. So I hope that in the interim, we could establish more study committees. We can establish maybe a bipartisan housing caucus with regular meetings, because we currently do not have a housing caucus. And we can continue to have conversations with those community members and stakeholders who have brilliant ideas on housing policy. It's just a matter of getting everyone to the table and hammering out what's possible.
How do the conversations with Republicans go? Is it even keel? Is it passionate? Is it a little bit of both?
Interacting with my Republican colleagues is just like interacting with folks in any workplace. It's all about personalities. Everybody has a different personality, a different way that they like to have a conversation. We do treat each other like humans. We ask about the kids. We ask about the summer vacation plans. It's not as hostile as it might seem when you're watching the floor debates, right?
That's what I was getting at. I was hoping that was the case.
But I always approach it by trying to put myself in their shoes. And it does help that I do have some family members that are very conservative that I've had very heated debates with in my life.
You've had good training.
That's right. So I think the biggest thing is people want to be heard out, and they want to talk about our values and our shared values. They want to look out for their constituents and their voter base. And I get that because I am doing the same for my folks. So just approaching things by trying to put yourself in the other side's shoes, but also holding the line to make sure that our fundamental values are never compromised. For example, I am a very strong supporter of our LGBTQ plus community. I am a very strong supporter of racial justice. And those are things that are always going to be at the front and center of the decisions that I make. And I won't compromise on certain issues when it comes to people's lives.
And it's smart, because criminal justice reform is about 200 and something years overdue in America. Maybe more than that, before America even became a country, because it all ties together for me. And this is another issue that I've always been incredibly passionate about, because I recognize as a white guy, my dealings with law enforcement are different than just about every person of color. I have a buddy named Travis who is in his 50s. He's black. He got pulled over a couple of weeks ago. And the first thing that went through his mind is, am I more worried about my ticket or because I'm black? I've never thought that in my life. So that's just a recent modern example. What is happening as far as criminal justice and reform, as far as Representative Analise Ortiz sees it in her community? Because, again, you have one of the more over-policed communities in the entire state, probably in the Southwest. So that means a lot of black and brown men mostly, but not always, get caught up in a legal system that once it starts, it's this massive, awful spiral that ruins lives, in my opinion. So how do you take that message to the state legislature and to Republicans, who I would think in their deep down love of the Constitution, Fourth Amendment, would want stronger protections for the people that live in your community, for example?
I really want folks to understand that in Arizona, you can commit a crime and go to prison for a longer period of time than if you had committed the same exact crime in a neighboring state. This is not an issue of, well, they did something bad, so lock them up and throw away the key. It's an issue of our state has historically been completely out of touch with our neighboring states when it comes to who goes to prison and for how long. So that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that we spend $1.1 billion maintaining our prison system every year.
That's in Arizona alone?
In Arizona alone.
Wow.
That's more than we spend on higher education.
Wow.
This is a costly issue. We are locking up people, many of whom have serious substance abuse need issues, and they need rehabilitation. Many of them, again, wouldn't go to prison for a drug crime if they had done it in another state. They would get some other kind of treatment or rehabilitation or supervision. We're doing things backwards here, and it's not helping anybody, because when you go to prison for 2 years on a low-level charge, you are learning tactics that are not ideal in those prisons because there is not adequate programming. There is not education going on. And you're becoming hardened in many ways. And when you come home, there's really nothing to set you up for success to make sure you don't go back to prison. And that is a huge problem. That makes all of us less safe.
Oh, absolutely. And it's costly, too, just from a resources standpoint. So I don't remember. What's the budget that you guys passed? Do you remember how many billion it is offhand? It's like 17 billion. So think about that. 1/17 of the entire budget goes to prisons. Is there a better way that we could use those resources to, I don't know, help kids, to maybe do something more about homelessness, which is increasing here in Arizona and everywhere else? That, I think, is such an important issue. Did you make any waves, I don't mean it in a negative way, did you make any headway in the, again, as a first-year lawmaker, did you gain any ground on that issue?
We did. I was honored to be appointed to Governor Hobbs' Prison Oversight Commission. So we are going to be looking in depth at the budget on what DOC is spending their money on and how they are treating people in prison and whether folks are getting the adequate programming they need. And there's a Republican on there, a former legislator, Representative Walt Blackman, who I had worked with when I was at ACLU on some of the sentencing reform initiatives. So the fact that this commission's been created is a big step forward. Now, when it comes to the Judiciary Committee, we have had some really great discussions in that committee about whether it makes sense to expand police powers. We were able to stop a bill sponsored by Senator Kern, that would have allowed police to question a passenger in a vehicle and to have to look at their ID and get their address, when previously and currently you do not have to talk to an officer if you are the passenger in a car. It would have expanded police powers unnecessarily. And there were Republicans who really care about the Constitution who saw that as a violation of the right to remain silent. Mm-hmm. And we were able to kill that bill.
Nice.
We also passed some really great reentry bills that are meant to help people when they come home from prison get into a job, get into housing, and again, be on a pathway of success so they don't go back to prison. So I am very proud of the progress we've made this year. As somebody who's been paying attention to criminal justice legislation for the past 5 years, to now be in the legislature and passing through some of these initiatives that we probably couldn't have dreamed of 5 years ago, it's huge. I'm very proud of how far we've come.
Separate issue, but related. Asset forfeiture. Super passionate about it. I've read books about it. It almost takes... It does. It takes the opposite approach of you're innocent till proven guilty by the government and reverses that and says, oh, we think you were involved in selling drugs. We're going to take your car. We're going to take your house. This has happened to retirees. This has happened to poor people. And you have to fight and spend the money to get that back. So is there any discussions about maybe reducing the power of asset forfeiture in Arizona?
Yes, I know there are Republicans that are very interested in that. You're right. It's taking away people's property before they've even been convicted of a crime. It's completely wrong, especially in the land of the free. So yes.
There's that ACLU coming out right there.
That's right.
But that's good. Because I really think what you're showcasing to me today is there is a hunger for solutions for Republicans and Democrats. And there might even be pathways for both sides to work together for meaningful change that actually matters for your district, for the Valley, for the state. Is that accurate? Because like you said, Representative, the television news coverage, the media coverage is that you as a Democrat are at the Republicans' throats and the Republicans are at your throats. Maybe that's not true all the time?
We passed a bipartisan budget this year that I felt very proud of. We had historic investments in housing, a brand new homelessness services fund that we had never had before, $60 million allocated to homelessness. So we know it's possible for us to work together and to get to solutions that maybe not everybody loves. They're not perfect, but everybody is happy about and can take it back to our communities and say, look, we got something done. The government can work at times. And I think that is a vision that I promise to my constituents. And there are a lot of Republicans and Democrats this year that are new, that are willing to kind of break with their party and to have some of those conversations. I think all of the lobbyists have expressed to me that this year has been very weird because they don't know how to estimate where people are going to land on certain issues, because there is such a willingness to work across the aisle. And to me, that is incredibly exciting. That's an opportunity. I want the best for Arizona. I, of course, want to flip our legislature. I want to see Democrats in control of the Senate, of the House, and of the governor's office. And I do believe we will get there. In the meantime, we have to work in the political environment that we are in. And again, doing nothing is never an option for me.
And I love that because I have some younger friends who are progressive and have taught me a lot about what that means. And the more I realize in my libertarian leanings, how much that I have in common with progressives. Because ultimately, my favorite thing about America is that I kind of get to decide how I want to live my life. And so long as it doesn't cause any civil rights violations of, say, you, Representative Ortiz. So that, to me, is the ultimate freedom that we should be protecting. And as a country, and policy-wise, how do we make it easier for people to be able to get that opportunity like I got to have? That, I think, is, I don't really care, again, if it's a Democrat thing, a Republican thing, an independent thing. I just want more people to be able to have that lane that they feel comfortable going in because it feels right. Like you said, you had your calling. Same thing. I want everybody to have that opportunity to kind of follow that calling instead of all the things we surround ourselves with, all the negativity. So I love that you're saying that. There is hope. Now, after you kind of wrapping up your first year, do you feel that way? Do you feel better than you did on day one or not?
Ooh, that is a good question. I don't think I've had time to think about that question because it has been so intense of just information, things changing so rapidly, and a lot of emotions. It's an emotional roller coaster every day. I was just knocking on doors the other day and giving people an update of what I had been working on this session. And I can say that, yes, I think I do feel better than I did on day one because we were able to deliver. And it might be a first step, right? We have so many policies that I would love to see passed that did not get passed this year. But we did secure historic funding for homelessness and housing. We did secure additional funding for kids care to expand the number of children who can have health insurance coverage. And that's huge. So yes, I'm proud of the work that I've done, that we have done as a Democratic caucus. I am proud of Governor Hobbs and the vetoes she has put forward to protect our LGBTQ plus community, to stop some of the bad bills that attacked teachers, that attacked unemployment benefits. We still have a very long way to go, but I do feel reinvigorated and ready to continue that fight. I am not stopping anytime soon.
Doesn't sound like it. So what was that, if you could sum up that first year in working on all the things that you did, housing, criminal justice reform, all the things that you mentioned, if you could sum up these 6 months as far as an experience for you, what was it like?
It was humbling. It was enjoyable. It was stressful. It was hard.
How many hours a week do you think you worked?
I could not tell you.
Because, in following you on social media and seeing what you were up to, it seems like you went all in.
Yes, I wake up about 7, get ready, have to go prep for committees if we have committees that day, prep for the bills, caucus. By the time I get home, maybe 6 or 7 p.m., just enough time to eat dinner and review the bills for the next day. So definitely 12-hour days, and we are making $24,000 a year.
I would just prefer if we went, you know what, let's go full-time, because then I don't feel like everything's a rush, too, because I feel like when you have a part-time legislature we do that tries to wrap up end of May and early June, you rush through things. And I think when you rush through things, you don't always get things right. And it probably could be better. But I don't know if that's in the cards. I don't know what we would have to do as a state to approve that.
I agree. Different states have different legislative approaches. I would like to see us be full-time. I would also like to see our pay increase because the $24,000 a year severely limits who can run for office. And it creates this disparity, and it's very hard for working class folks to do this. So I would love to see a full-time legislature. I think it would make for better candidates, and it would make for better policy.
And I think that when I talk about political opposition, I want the best. I want the smartest, most passionate people, and I want those ideas out there because I think it's better for our communities, our valley, our state of Arizona, and if every state does that, it's better for everybody. So I read this theory once that if it takes paying people that want to represent $1 million a year and it gets the best candidates, well, let's pay them $1 million a year because it could be worth it. So how do you grapple with that, though? Because you came up in media, I came up in media. My first job full-time in media was $17,000 a year. It is just scraping by, right? Wow. And that was in 2000. So it's the equivalent about what you're making now based on inflation. It's hard to live like that.
Yes.
It's, I had at the time $30,000 in credit card debt. I hope you don't. But, I just assumed I was going to get a college degree. I was going to get this fancy job. I was going to get paid like $50,000 a year. Nope, 17. So it's like reality slaps you in the face, but it also kind of limits what you can do as a human, as a person, in trying to work 12 hours a day because you went full-time on this. So this is your passion. So how do you manage that? How do you work through that? Despite that hang-up, you still love what you do.
I got to tell this story because it's funny. My dad, when I was trying to find out what I was going to do after high school, I told him that I wanted to be an actress because I did theater in high school and I really enjoyed it. And he said, absolutely not. You need to get a real job. You're not going to make any money. And so I said, fine, whatever, Dad. I'll go to journalism school. And then my first job out of journalism school, I was making $30,000, which was nothing. So I was like, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, I know.
Great advice.
You geared me towards another career where there's no money. Yes.
So I would say I have always done jobs that I love, not for the pay. In fact, before I ran for office, I was making $100,000 at the ACLU. Wow. And I took a 50% pay cut at a different nonprofit that would have let me run and keep my job, which the ACLU would not allow me to do. And it is a labor of love. I've never been in this for the money, ever. And one of the bigger things, right, is I think that my perspective as somebody who has had to pay off student loans, who cannot afford to be a homeowner, these things really help me connect with my community because I know what it's like. I'm living it too. And I think that is something that people might feel a little bit more open to talking to me about the issues that they're dealing with and asking for advice. And it fuels my fire to make rent affordable when I am looking at my paycheck and my bank account like, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay rent. So that's really important. And I think maybe tying legislator pay to maybe teacher pay would help legislators see that we need to be paying teachers more. So
Totally
that's
agree.
one potential fix to all of this. But yeah, it's been a challenge.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people just kind of don't talk about, because typically what you get in Arizona is you get a lot of retirees that run for office, or a lot of wealthy people or business owners that can adapt their day. You are, no, I'm doing this. This is my passion. This is exactly what I want to do. But it's difficult for you because of that. So if you're kind of wrapping up, what are your plans for the rest of the year as far as you're a politician now? You still got to represent your people, and you still got to maybe, I don't know, you're going to have a side hustle? you going to work on that too? Or are you just going to kind of do what you do and just carry that throughout the year?
I am looking for part-time work.
Okay, so if anybody's hiring, needs to hire a really smart young person. Yes.
I am a small business owner. I do have a communications consulting firm. I hope to maybe pick up some clients there. But I am most excited to start working on bills for next session. So things aren't going to slow down. I feel like now that I've been through my first year and I know what's expected when it comes to introducing bills and working with policy staff, I'm much better equipped to introduce some really great policy ideas next year. And I'm very much looking forward to that. So the work starts as soon as we sign die.
I love the passion. I really do. And what do you think was the thing you're most proud of from year one? And what is the lesson you learned the most from to apply to year two?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I come with it, Rep. I come with it.
Aside from the policy wins, what I'm most proud of is being a voice for my community, to knock on doors and have people tell me that they feel heard, that they feel that I am representing them and their needs adequately, is the most humbling thing I could ever hear, and something that I will never, ever take for granted. So I'm proud of that. What have I learned? So much. I have learned so much.
Well, yeah, doing 14-hour days every day. You're bound to learn a few things, right?
Yes. To apply to year two, having a better understanding of coalition building. How can we get all of these stakeholders who have competing interests sometimes to kind of move in the same direction and to settle on an idea that we can all be proud of and champion? I think with some of our housing policies, we had a lot of people from different areas of the housing and homelessness industry have some competing views on things. But I know that there's common ground in there. And I think in this interim, we have more time to sort out those differences. And I have learned really some best practices of how to do that, and how to respect everybody's opinions and differences, and how to let go of some things that I know there won't be compromise on. And knowing that having to let go in a compromise doesn't mean we lost. It just means the fight's going to continue in the coming years.
It's a great way to approach it, because, the same in any relationship, really, right? It's you have a partner, I have a partner. I've been with mine for 24 years. There's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of sometimes we're going to do what she thinks is right versus what I think is right. Sometimes it's a, conglomeration of the two things. So I think that governance could be like that. And it sounds like you take that approach. What do you do if it gets passionate and heat starts to fly out of people's mouths, and sometimes emotional words can be, difficult?
In committee or behind closed doors?
Oh, that's a great differentiation. Let's go behind closed doors. Well, I think there's so much value we could get out of this in our own lives, right? And how you're having these tough conversations.
It's very interesting, because I think I mentioned before that there are people in both caucuses willing to vote against their party. And that means that some of the closed-door caucus meetings, I think, for both parties can be challenging. I think we're at this point in our country where she's no longer a Democrat, but she called herself a Democrat for a long time. Mm-hmm. People like Kirsten Sinema, who have not necessarily moved in the direction that their party or their voters have wanted them to move. That doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything as Democrats, but it means that we do have those challenging conversations. And sometimes, the conversation around the family dinner is contentious.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest things that I try to lead from, which is something we use in community organizing, which is called principled struggle. And what it means is we know there's a conflict here, but we both care about each other and we love each other and we want to come to a resolution. So let's sit down, and we're not going to be passive aggressive. We aren't going to hurl insults, but we're going to talk about how did this make me feel when this happened? And where do we have that common ground? And how can we move past this in a way that acknowledges both of our humanity and acknowledges both of our goals in this fight? So that is an important value that I'm always going to hold in my heart, and I hope my colleagues will hold that as well. I know many of them do. In committee with the Republicans, let's be real, as much as I talked about working with the Republicans, there are some very harmful ideas that were proposed this year. We as a nation are entering a very scary time where there are attacks on our voting rights. There are attacks on democracy as a whole. There are attacks on public education that aim to ban books and imprison teachers for teaching certain topics that someone thinks are not appropriate without any real data or evidence to back that up. It's scary. So I'm never afraid to challenge my Republican colleagues in committee. I come with receipts and I come with the data and evidence. I am up for best debater from the Arizona Capitol Times.
No kidding. That's fantastic.
We'll see if I win.
I love that.
So it's important to me to defend my community in those moments because some of the things we hear in committee are hurtful and harmful, and the rhetoric is not okay. So I'm always ready to take on those fights and be a defender for the folks that are marginalized.
Representative Analise Ortiz, this has been insightful, eye-opening, and quite frankly, it's been a lot of fun. So I would love to learn more about your community. I would love to learn more about those issues. So if you'd be willing to come back, we could spend some time talking about housing and get more in depth. I would love to talk about criminal justice reform. I would love to talk about LGBTQ plus issues and anything else that you think is worthy of needing more information for us, right? Because data, stats, conversation matters to move forward and, continue standing up for freedom.
Let's do it.
Oh, that was such a great conversation. Representative Ortiz and I don't agree on everything, and that's fantastic because listening helps us understand what matters. Then we can make real progress towards reducing poverty, improving education, and increasing quality of life. Because ultimately, we care about people. Thank you, Representative Analise Ortiz. Follow her on TikTok at Rep. Analise Ortiz. She's going to give you great updates about these issues that we talked about today. Next week, retired New York City police officer Rob Coppola makes his return to Equal Matters. What was it like being a cop in New York on 9/11? You'll get a firsthand experience on Equal Matters. Subscribe, and please help me spread the word by telling a couple friends about the Equal Matters podcast. If you have comments, send them to rob@equalmatters.com. Also, I'd love to know what topics you're interested in learning more about. Again, rob@equalmatters.com. Thanks for being here and making it all the way to the end. I'm Rob Hunter. Good night.